Welcome, everybody. This week, we're going to be discussing Parshat Noah. My name is Daniel Levine. I'm the rabbi for Orange County Hillel and also the rabbinic fellow at Temple Beth Tikva. And I'm joined here by two amazing colleagues and friends. Rabbi Peter, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Peter Levy. I'm the regional director for the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League here in Orange County and Long Beach. And I'm a former colleague with our next guest.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Heather Miller. I'm the founder of Keeping It Sacred. You can find us at keepingitsacred.com. Accessible, relevant, and empowering Torah. Great to be here.
Awesome. So to start our conversation, we have this classic depiction of Abraham. I'm jumping ahead in Parshiot, but Abraham as being the sort of quote unquote first monotheist. But it begs the question, when we look at this week's Parsha, we're introduced to a man named Noah, who clearly had a relationship with God. Clearly, he could have been the sort of Abraham, the progenitor of the Jewish people. So I wanted to start off by throwing out a question. This is something that classic Jewish sources, contemporary Jewish sources discuss of why are we not the people of Noah? Why are we not the nation of Noah?
Well, it's a great question, Daniel, but to a certain degree, right, if the whole world is B'nai Noach, we're all the children of Noah, right, we are part of that family too. The Jewish people always understood that the entire world lives under the covenant that Noah and Noah's family established with God. So we are. But then there's also something like, the Jewish people are that unique child because they're 10 generations later, that covenant was redefined through Abraham and Sarah and their family. So I think, we are to a certain degree, yeah, Noah was really important.
I always wonder, one of the defining characteristics of Noah is that he shut people out, right? He brought his family into that ark, commanded by God to do it. So in his defense, right? And in his defense, also, the text says that God actually put the final closing on that ark. But his defining characteristic is really that he shut out the whole world. And if he shuts out the whole world, I don't think that we as a Jewish people who's so communally based, we're not about being, individualists and we're going to separate ourselves from the community, right? We say, don't separate yourself from the community. So he couldn't ever be that singular, Noach Avinu, right? The patriarch, the ancestor of the Jewish people, because he shut people out. And I think it was really detrimental to him as well. We know that after the floodwaters receded, one of the first things he did was he planted a vineyard, and he was known to get drunk, right? Because of the trauma that accompanies shutting people out. I think that, in this time of COVID, it's really difficult for people that people are shutting people out from their lives. And what is that balance between shutting people out and letting people in and doing it safely and still connecting with people? Do we only ever do Zoom? Do we not? In my family, we have two kids under, 7 years old. We have a 6 and a 4-year-old, and they're obviously not yet vaccinated, although there was good news this morning that might be coming soon. But that idea, do we just shut everybody out and keep everybody safe, or do we find other ways to connect with people? So, Abraham and Moshe were connectors of people, and that should be our hallmark.
Yeah, I really love that interpretation. And just picking up something, one of the things from the opening verse in this week's Torah portion is it calls Noah Tamim Haya B'Dorotav, right? A man or a person who was perfect in his generation. So of course the rabbis and the midrash pick up on that and say, well, why is the word generation thrown in there? And they suggest that Noah actually only for his generation of a world full of wickedness and full of robbery and theft, as the Torah describes, perhaps he was a little bit better than the status quo there, but actually seen in any other generation because of what you said, Rabbi Heather, because he wasn't this person that was going out to connect, because he sort of only built the ark for himself. And one actual midrash, I think, depicts God after the flood as getting mad at Noah and saying, I told you to build an ark. I didn't say you couldn't invite anyone else into your ark. And so sort of comparing that with Abraham, who we know specifically had a tent that was open from a multiplicity of directions, as if to say anybody that's coming from any life point is welcome here.
Moshe bringing all the people together right at Mount Sinai, everybody, women and children and men, and everybody in the community was there. He was a generalist as well.
It's also one of the beautiful things about our tradition is that there's ambivalence, because at the same time, right, we know in the rabbinic tradition, they said, but Noah was clearly a tzaddik. He was a great, righteous person, and he had incredible redemptive qualities. So, there's other ones that say for generations, he didn't build the ark. He had to plant seeds and he had to grow trees. And for tens of years, I don't even know, right? He was like, as the trees are growing, they say, what are you doing? He's like, well, God, if we don't change our ways and redeem ourselves and act morally, right, and ethically in this world, we're going to be destroyed. And no one believed him. So maybe he was like in the Hebrew Bible, right, a failed prophet, sending the message and no one heeding it. But there was a sense that he was attempting to be inclusive, that he was sharing it with the people he was, and that message wasn't being heeded. Look, I love Heather. I love your message of shutting out and inclusiveness, because that's where we ended up. But there is this attempt, right? It's like he's called a righteous person. He is a tzaddik. So how do we understand this? So what are other aspects of Noah that we can really learn from, versus just say, well, he looked good in his generation? It could be when you're in the midst of everyone else who is, lying and cheating, who only cares about their 401ks, who that has no sense of contributing and thinking of other stakeholders in the community, but only about themselves. Like, how do you resist, like, being like everyone else in the neighborhood, in the world? How do you stand above that? Look, it's a great question, let's say, for Israel to bring contemporary in the family of nations in this world. Is Israel just another country like every country, or is it trying to go to the vision, not only the ancient vision of being an Or LaGoyim, a light to all the other nations and stand apart, but even in its own declaration of independence, the vision that it sets forth for itself, which is aspirational when it was written 75 years ago, but also today, still aspirational. Are we supposed to be just like everyone else, or how do we stand apart and above? So I think there's a lot, sort of in the Noah story when we think about the abstract. And I think our tradition, right, well before we as, small R rabbis, the capital R rabbis of yore, really they saw this, they interpreted multiple ways.
Yeah, I love it. And one of the things that I try to always stress to students is that the Torah is purposely elusive or austere in the sense where it almost forces a community of interpreters to come together. Mm-hmm. And so the whole point is that we actually don't know, there's no addendum at the end saying, P.S. Noah was a great guy and you should treat him as such, or P.S. Noah was just an average dude, please don't learn any good life lessons from him. And that actually forces later generations to come together and have these conversations.
Right. We always see both the shadows and the light of every individual in the Torah. And it's a really good reminder for all of us that everyone is that mixture of pieces. One thing that I thought was really interesting in the Torah portion was how Noah tried to figure out when it was safe to come outside again. I think, being in isolation for this long, I'm always trying to figure out when is it safe to come outside yet. And his example that I thought was instructive for us was that he sent out two birds, a raven first and then a dove. And I thought that was interesting because we have that, Radak and Sforno and Chizkuni, right? It says that they thought that maybe they sent out the raven first because it was a hardier animal. And they thought, Noah thought that it would be able to come right back. But it never came back, and there's actually a little text that says that maybe it's still flying around waiting for the gates of Gan Eden to open back up and to go back in. But the dove, that did go out and come back, right, 3 times with 7 days in between, and eventually it did fly away. And that idea that, I was studying with at the Women's Rabbinic Network. We had a board meeting this week, and a rabbi there, Rabbi Rebecca Reese, offered the Torah portion, the idea that maybe the raven really symbolizes for us that like individuality and that sense of protecting ourselves, and the dove is more about interdependence and figuring out when do we fly out that raven? When do we fly out that dove? Are we going to just protect ourselves, or do we, you know, engage in community with the dove as well? So that idea of sending two doves, you know, what are our indicators? I was wondering what you thought. What are our indicators of that it's safe to come outside yet or not?
I really love that. I mean, the first thing that I thought when you said that was that it almost requires it to be a step-by-step process, meaning it's not a binary where Noah goes from, you know, torrential flood to all of a sudden, okay, everything's great, let's go outside. It's actually this spectrum of, you know, testing it out. Okay, there's clearly some vegetation, but is it still safe? Okay, you know, and you can almost, you know, write in, you know, even in between the lines of Noah, you know, I always, you know, had this vision in my head. I think, you know, from some children's book I read when I was little, that Noah, you know, first landed and he stepped out and his shoes were all muddy and he got upset and he went back and he said he was going to go somewhere else. And I think that really speaks to the moment that we're in, when there isn't really that clear binary on and off switch of things going from in the ark to, okay, everything's perfect. And I think, you know, just one more thing I'll say on this was also the Yonah, the dove, is of course the universal symbol of peace within both Judaism and also a lot of other monotheistic religions. And I think what this says about general peace and general universality is that these things take time and that it's a spectrum and that we can constantly be making incremental progress.
Yeah. You know, I think you bring up, it's a really interesting point, Heather. And what I think one piece is Noah didn't decide based on just Noah's self, that want to gather information, right? And the way they use this information was the behavior of birds, of nature, and what was going on out there. And, you know, coming back with the branches, then not coming back, so it had place to rest its foot, right? So, you know, so we needed some evidence out there. So, whatever, evidence-based, you know, decision-making.
And that's apparently, Sarna says that's what the Greeks did and the Sumerians did also. That was their practice. The mariners' practice was to figure out how close they were to land, to figure out the weather conditions, was to send out birds.
Birds, right, yeah. Look, canaries in coal mines, birds on ships. You know, it's like, I feel, you know, I'm having a little empathy for these birds, you know, about that. But you know, it's like, it's right. It's gathering information. It's not going on instinct. It's not taking things for granted. You know, it's certainly not, you know, finding it on Facebook anymore, right? If you know, I'm talking about the news of this week. You know, you know, it doesn't, you know, actually the other news of this week makes me remind of, you know, poor birds. But now what about the Impossible Pork, which is a plant-based product? Because, you know, and certainly Noah went into the ark a vegetarian and came out of the ark eating meat. So, but I don't know if we want to talk about whether or not meat-based pork should be kosher or not, but
leave that for another day.
I love it. One last, you know, the I guess inter-biblical Jewish nerd in me is screaming out one more thing, where dove, of course, in Hebrew means Jonah or Yonah, and the main story in the Torah in the Tanakh of Jonah also involves a person at sea dealing with a storm and sort of dealing with their own personal tension of different values, right? To Jonah, it was sort of the value of truth versus the value of actually reaching out to people and allowing a level of forgiveness. And so this idea, whether we're talking about COVID, whether we're talking about, you know, wider universal peace between nations, or even the tension of values, I think one of the things in which Judaism makes clear through, especially this week's Parsha, is that things seldom exist in a binary, and that there's a whole spectrum of ways in which one can approach tension between two different values.
And it also shows that, you know, when there is tumult and there is indecision and there is, you know, challenge, that, you know, we can learn a lot about ourselves, and we can also learn a lot about our own theology and our own connection with the divine during those times. That, right, Noah's name is Noach, right, from Lanuach, to be at ease, and to, you know, ironically, that when the storms are raging, this is a time to kind of go into yourself and to think more about who you are and where your center compass is, and figure that out. Also, I just want to say it's my brother Noah's birthday today. And I just want to honor him with this Torah. The Torah that I'm offering today is in his honor.
Beautiful. You know, there is, I've heard a teaching that right? Part of what made Noach and his family so special and holy was exactly that connection, right? Noach and Menucha, and this idea that they actually observed Shabbat Menucha, and that they pulled up all the light and the holiness in the world, and they brought it with them in the ark, and that was like part of their gift for all of us. Maybe that's why we drink wine, to welcome Shabbos. But Daniel, you also sort of mentioned this intertextuality. Of course, the first time we see an ark or teva is in this week's Parsha with Noah. The next time we see a teva, which is actually interesting, is what's often translated as a little wicker basket. But Moses, right, as a baby, is sent down the river Nile in a teva, right, where it's one person, right, not the diversity, but somehow that isolated hero's journey, right, brings this potential for redemption, at least for the Jewish people, through Moses' story. So it's just an interesting, contrast there about how we're supposed to think about Teva, how this journey on the waters of uncertainty brings this potential for saving our world.
I love it. Thank you so much, Rabbi Peter and Rabbi Heather. This was such a wonderful discussion. Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and happy Parsha Noah.
Shabbat Shalom,
Shabbat
everyone.
Shalom.